Welcome, my name's David Bailey and I'm a life coach, and today on this episode I'm joined with a friend of mine, Pete Bennett, who is a Menswork coach.
Correct.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, David. What a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, it's great because we've been connected for a long time, over 10 years, and we kind of stayed in touch online, but this is the first time I've actually spoken to you for many years. So
many years.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Me too.
So last time I met you was in the Amazon jungle in Peru, and I know you've come a long way since then. You've changed your career, and you're working as a Menswork coach. Could you explain what exactly that is?
All right. Well, in a nutshell, Menswork is all around sort of nurturing the masculine, sort of facing down a lot of the challenges, a lot of the pressures that men face today, whether it's the label of toxic masculinity, whether it's the stress and strain of everyday life. Menswork is just about bringing men together, sharing, supporting one another. And at its heart, it's very much around sort of mental health and maintaining a healthy, happy perspective, but also getting like life's checks and balances in order. So I work with men around direction, around motivation and confidence.
Had you, prior to that, done work with men and women, or was it always like, I really want to work with men? What was the motivation to specifically choose to work with men?
I have in the past done mentoring with women as well, particularly for a charity around asylum seekers here in the UK. But what got me into doing men's work was attending a men's circle myself. So I'd go before the pandemic hit to a circle in Peckham where we'd meet in person. And that was my first introduction to this kind of work. So I would say that kind of set me on this path. And then I did some training. I got certified as a facilitator. And since then, I've been exclusively working with men.
Right. And so you, as somebody that attended that, what was the effect on your life?
Well, just the idea that people, strangers, are caring and are sort of interested in your story. As someone, who's grown up with lots of sort of male friends, particularly in circles where you're not that encouraged to be vulnerable or to be open and transparent. Like, I love my friends and my brothers, but it helped me to find others that I could share my experiences with, especially things that I felt a little bit of insecurity around, felt a little bit uncomfortable speaking. So for me, the opportunity to speak on my concerns and my challenges just grounded me, really, gave me the opportunity to feel a lot more seen, a lot more heard. And I became kind of empowered by those experiences. I started to recognize that all of us, all men, and most likely women too, share similar issues. We kind of have similar problems. And so by hearing that and sharing that and seeing others reflect that back and speaking on their stories, it just gave me purpose. And I realized, like, this is actually really powerful work.
Right. Okay. And so, because last time we met in person, that is, you were working in the media, and I know you went on to, like, how did you get on to going from a media job presenting? Because I know you're working for Russia Today,
RT UK,
RT UK, and then other presenting jobs. And how did you make that, or what was the motivation to make that transition, and how did that happen?
Well, for me, I was working in media production for around 10 years and had various different roles: producer, executive producer, presenter, like you mentioned, directing, etc. And as creatively fulfilling as it could be at times, it did feel just the tip of the iceberg. I don't want to sort of badmouth the media industry, but for me, there were moments where it felt quite shallow and it didn't go deep enough. And I was making packages, sort of TV segments for a current affairs show for international broadcast. And the packages I was making were quite soulful. They were touching on subjects close to my heart, social issues, racism, sexism, just discrimination ultimately. And it didn't really go far enough. And so towards the end of that period in my life, I started to question what I was doing. Was I having an impact? How far could I progress in this role? And actually, that's kind of what led me to go into men's circles and started the ball rolling, really.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I also used to work in the media and had that similar kind of epiphany, like, is this really making a difference? And do I want to spend 9 hours a day doing this? Is that going to be something I can look back on and feel like I've been of value or been of service? So that, yeah, I can definitely relate to that experience.
That Soho kind of mentality, I'm sure you experienced that. It's like you work hard and you play hard and there isn't much space for anything else. So.
Yeah. So the going, when you joined the men's circle yourself, that was kind of a search for meaning.
Yeah, it was just seeking others like myself, and seeing myself in others too. So, I kind of gravitate towards people with substance, maybe, if that's the right thing to say. Like when I'm at like a gathering, I tend to be the person in the corner, like conversating about philosophy or politics or something of that nature. And so men's circles was an extension of that, and then it became so much more. Right.
Yeah. And how did you go from being an attendee or like going to this event to then deciding, actually, I want to help facilitate and dedicate my life to this?
Well, the circle that I attended was part of a wider organization called Mankind Project, started in the States, I think back in the 60s or 70s, kind of based on Native American principles of the powwow and men coming together in the village and sort of hashing out their issues before returning to the family home. So they happened to be doing a workshop, a training session where you could go if you wanted to learn more about how to put on your own circles. And so I did that and I loved it and I got really good feedback. And that's kind of what got me thinking this could be something I would want to pursue.
I've been to some sharing circles, but I think it'd be good to just talk about what exactly that is and how the process works. Like if someone's watching this and what exactly is a sharing circle? Okay,
so a men's circle or a support group, to my design, to my specification, is just about sitting down in a circle with other men or people who identify as a man. And you're invited to share how you're feeling, what you're going through. We tend to open up by saying our name, saying, and I'm in, like you enter the circle physically and also mentally, emotionally. And then you discuss maybe a high or a low from the past fortnight when we last met. And then it goes into any issues that people are facing. If they want to share that, if they want to bring that to the circle, could be a breakdown of a relationship at work, at home. It could be health concerns. And we just open that up to everyone. And not that people are invited to give advice, but it's more just hearing what someone has to say and maybe sharing some insights that you have yourself. And as someone who's been trained to facilitate, I then go to ask a few questions, maybe seek out some more understanding, advise them or invite them to be factual and not emotional and not bring a lot of their baggage maybe with them. And then once we work through a few of those issues, we go on to discuss or do different exercises. So it could be that we're talking about relationships. And we say, well, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a partner? And then we use that as a launch pad to have a convo. And then at the end, we just close the circle by saying what we've learned, anything that we've wanted to have happen, maybe it didn't happen, maybe set some intentions, set some goals for the next fortnight, and then we close the circle and bid each other adieu. So.
Nice. Yeah. And do you think there's much of a need for this kind of thing right now?
Well, I would say 100%, especially during this pandemic. I've noticed a lot of my friends and other men kind of be challenged, be under pressure from work and from home and just generally from life. And mental health is so important. And this tool, sort of men's work groups, are just about maintenance and ensuring that you have a regular check-in and people can hold you accountable as well. So I would say now more than ever, it is really important to attend things like this, or to have friends or people you can share with.
Yeah, I can concur like that. That's been my experience as well. I know a few friends have been really struggling, and like even myself for a period of the pandemic, when I was forced to kind of come back to the UK, it was difficult, and often we were literally isolating. That was the name given to being alone, and that's just not a natural state of being for humans. And I think right now, like, men especially are not, as you've mentioned, encouraged to be vulnerable or talk about their feelings, and having a space where you're able to do that is really key and crucial, I think.
Yeah. And, a lot, obviously we know sort of statistics in terms of suicide and self-harm and addiction amongst young men. And I'm sure during the pandemic, these have spiked as well. So it's even more pertinent, even more powerful to kind of get these tools out there and get them in circulation. And so that's partly why I was called to do this. And I sort of switched up my approach. Now I'm very much like keen to get onto social media, to have conversations like this, to use the internet and the networks connectivity as a way to spread this message.
Awesome. And what for you has been like some of the breakthroughs you've seen, like without like giving anybody's names away, but what are some of the results you've seen as either from that you facilitated yourself or in others that have been there in groups that you've attended?
I mean, there's so many. It's such a wide range from issues with relationships and sort of finding a space where you can hash it out and go home with a clear head and a clear heart. People who are prone to stress, feeling a lot more calm and relaxed after a workshop, for example, that I've held. People who have issues at work, who've had disagreements with their boss or clients, being able to sort of develop boundaries because they've had work, they've done the men's work, and they can then go back and be very clear about what they want and what they don't want. So I would say probably the biggest breakthroughs is around an individual's approach to their own lives. So whether it's communication, whether it's intimacy, there's just so many ways that we can develop as a human being.
And during the pandemic, were you doing this work online? How did it work?
Yeah, I moved online, and if anything, that's kind of been even more of a surprise at how many men from different parts of the UK want to jump on and have these conversations. I only just recently got onto meetup.com, sort of a platform for putting events on like this, or just a whole wide range of different events. And yeah, I've been blown away by how many people kind of approached me and said, "Oh, we found you through Google." And yeah, it seems like the pandemic has been obviously very difficult for many, but it's also led many back to themselves and caused them to ask really important questions. And develop themselves. And it's there's a positive. There's positive, you know. There's a silver lining, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it's like a stress test for society and the individual, and sometimes people won't actually seek help until they reach that point where they're forced to. And you know, as painful as that can be, if it can help people reach out and get help. And I think from my observation, it seems that the mental health, the taboo around it, of course there is still some, but it seems less than even just 5 years ago, that there is an acknowledgement that we all struggle, and that's just part of being human, and talking about it and bringing the dark out into the light is a normal and healthy process.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I mean, you know, just to share a little bit of my own journey as someone who grew up very shy and kind of nervous around strangers, felt throughout my young years into my sort of early 20s a bit of an outsider and unable to fully express myself without drugs and alcohol, basically, or being out partying. And that was where a lot of these kind of relationships got formed. And then as I grew older, I realized, well, look, I don't feel quite myself when I'm sober, or when I'm kind of feeling a little insecure and a little bit tender. Hence what led me to the Amazon when we met, and that whole journey started back to myself, and realizing, well, actually, if I speak on the way I'm feeling, if I do feel a bit sensitive, and I don't have to hide that from others, I don't have to suffer in silence. I can be kind of like assertive with my own boundaries, and take self-care as a priority, and not try to please people all the time. So that's definitely something I've learned. And I would say the same with the pandemic. People are starting to recognize that you are the priority, and it's important to kind of get your house in order.
Yeah. You sent over your bio, and one thing I didn't realize about you was that you grew up in Bangladesh. And would you be able to talk a little bit about like what that was like growing up there?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was born in London, but when I was about 2.5 years old, we moved to Bangladesh. My dad was a engineer, so a lot of the time he would work in different parts of the world on irrigation systems. In Bangladesh particularly, he was working on flood protection. Big monsoons cause lots of issues out there. So yeah, for about 7-8 years, I was living and going to school in an international school in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, which was awesome because we had so many different types of cultures and people represented there. Big expat community, lots of great trips around Asia as a kid, saw a lot of culture, and then would come back to the UK temporarily. But I never really felt much like I was British. I felt very kind of international, which when we eventually moved back to the UK, that was quite confusing, like being kind of this like kind of hippie kid in a way without much knowledge of British kind of society, and being thrust back into schooling. And you know, kids at that kind of age are quite harsh, you know, so having to face down criticism and bullying and things like that, and kind of being my own man. And you know, that in some ways is kind of what exacerbated like my own kind of like insecurities, like feeling a bit of an outsider. And then going to a boarding school actually eventually, which I had to like start again and create a whole new life and start gathering new friends who to this day, 20 plus years later, are still like my closest brothers.
Okay. And that formative experience of being in a very mixed environment, do you think that shaped a lot of who you are right now? Yeah,
I mean, you know, my approach has always been quite eclectic, really. You know, I've got an Eastern heritage growing up in Bangladesh, traveling around India. I'm very interested in meditation, in movement, whether it's yoga or Tai Chi, Qigong, those sorts of things. But also kind of having this Western mentality where I'm quite interested in the science, in the facts, and kind of the rationale in some way. So yeah, I'm definitely mixed. Like my own heritage is pretty mixed, and my background is mixed, and the people I mix with are mixed as well. So, you know, I think it's kind of important to, for me at least, have sort of diverse influences and interests.
Yeah. And do you bring them to the way you approach the sharing circle and coaching?
Yeah. I mean, in the sharing circle, it's still quite, I wouldn't say formulaic, but it's got that kind of Native American sat round the circle, passing around the peace pipe kind of vibe. But yeah, in terms of like coaching and general like workshops and things like that, I do tend to keep people on their toes. I like to throw things at the men that I work with that I know they can handle. So, for example, I have a client who was having some frustration with a work situation and family and things of that nature. And so I started talking about shadow work, which isn't very mainstream. Shadow work being based on sort of the Jungian principle of finding this darkness within us, the kind of the shame and the guilt and the things we don't want to talk about in the light of day, and owning those parts and integrating those parts and using that as fuel to be more integrated, to be more in alignment, to be more whole. So I would say, I like to keep it fresh. Yeah.
And of course, like we met in an ayahuasca ceremony in Peru, and I know you were traveling for, I think, was it a year after that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How did that impact you, that experience?
Oof. I mean, I would say that was the beginning of the end, really, David. It was so different to what I'm used to. Living in the Amazon with a tribe for 2-3 weeks, we were there.
Yeah.
Really like being part of their society, teaching the kids English, playing football with them every day, living in a maloka, like sleeping in a hammock. And that for me, because I did go on to travel quite a lot and I was working abroad as well after that, kind of set this precedent where I was like, oh, wow, like there's so much pleasure and simplicity, if that makes sense. Like I don't need a lot to have joy in my life, to be blissed out, and it's all about the simple things. And so I learned there and then that really I could kind of cultivate my own life and be the author of my own story.
Yeah, I think for everybody that went to that, was a very powerful experience. And not just like for me, just the whole thing of, like you said, living with the tribe, being with the kids, teaching, just being in a very different environment, that was as much part of it as the actual ayahuasca itself, because it was just seeing a total different way of life. And personally, I saw, there's, other things that are possible. It's not just because if you grew up in London, it's like, I've been working in the media for already some years, and you kind of get blinkers on that this is the only option. I have to live like this. And going there, and I also did traveling, I was like, yeah, there are other ways we can live, not just the London, not trying to hit on London, I love London, but you know what I mean, that the way of working in a corporate, working for media, working in or nothing else. There are other lifestyles available.
Traveling is so important, and I really do encourage anyone who has the opportunity. Like it is a privilege, don't get me wrong. Like, especially with what's happening now in the world, it's difficult to go anywhere. But it opens up your horizons, and you start to recognize that we are all connected through our humanity, through our shared experiences, and you learn to be more compassionate. Well, I learned to be more compassionate, more open-hearted, and that really, to me, it was like the biggest lesson is to accept everyone, and to kind of be just a willing participant in this weird sort of planet, this weird life that we're all kind of thrust into without our, knowledge, whatever.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing, traveling. You meet people, even if you don't speak the same language, you can still connect with a smile or eye contact or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I know you just got back from Spain. What was you up to out there?
So I have a friend who has a space in Spain. So it was just a bit of a getaway. Like I've been, as we all have, kind of felt a bit isolated, felt a bit trapped, living and working from home. So it's just a nice sort of well-being getaway to spend some time in nature, on the beach, went swimming in some waterfalls, bit of meditation and breath work, and a lot of sangria. Yeah, it's fun.
Cool. Yeah, nice. Sounds good. And so do you do the Wim Hof method as well?
I do. I do Wim Hof. I love that. I also am into different types of holotropic breathing, and recently have had some transformational breath work. So yeah, I mean, breathing is one of the most powerful tools to kind of come back into your body and stop overanalyzing and the monkey mind victimizing us, the ego and all that. So yeah, I love breath work. I try and do some breath work every day, and then I throw in some cold water sort of swimming as well, which is like one of my top tips, really.
Yeah, I saw you posted something around that. That looks really cool. And do you do that with any of the groups you do?
Well, I've got a bunch of friends that we do the swimming with. I would like to they just called yesterday the 19th of July Freedom Day. So here in the UK, lockdown is supposedly over. So the more the things are opening up, the more I'd like to kind of put together groups. I know I've put things on my socials before, and a lot of people have been like, I'd love to go on a retreat, go somewhere into the wilderness and do this work. So, that's kind of in the pipeline at the moment. Very
cool. Yeah, I just got back from Koh Phangan, and I was in, they've got quite a few different like saunas and retreats there. And I went to some with ice baths, and it's the first time I've had an ice bath since doing the breathing, and it was intense. I literally felt like I was hallucinating when I came out, because I was like, I managed 8 minutes, and it only for the last couple of minutes I could feel the cold. I mean, of course I could feel it prior to that, but only for the last 2 minutes I'd say I noticed like this is really cold. And yeah, just was able to do more push-ups than I'd ever done before. And it was very, like, I like how you mentioned that it just brings you back into your body, because if you're like me, I analyze things and can get too caught up in my head, and I think that's the mode we're encouraged to be in today's society, because kind of get stuff done. If you want to, build a bridge or create a TV show, you have to send emails, you have to do that, this and that. So that mode of being is much more rewarded financially anyway, and at school than the more just being present, being in our own bodies and grounded. But I think it's equally important, especially for mental health. For sure. And I think you're 100% correct, and it is to some degree this masculine way of thinking, to be analytical, to structure everything, to kind of use this penetrative force, and the sharing, the embodiment is quite feminine. It's kind of using these other tools to nurture and to hold ourselves. And I think for me, balance is really important. And not to get too tantric or esoteric, but these energies we all carry, we all contain them within ourselves. So it's important to check in from time to time. And you mentioned mindfulness, I think, before we spoke, and just having those moments when we can really feel and be tentative to our body and to our surroundings. It gives the masculine, an opportunity to kind of rest and recuperate, because we can't be 100% on 100% of the time. Yeah, very much so. And I like what you said about the balance, because sometimes there's like a demonization of the analytical and the critical thinking, which is very necessary. And it's not that it's bad per se, it's just it needs to be balanced out in context. There's a time and a place for both of these to exist.
100%. And people are encouraged to climb the ladder, career, life, possessions, and there's all this drive for the material, and that can be quite a soulless pursuit. You get many people who've reached these heights who don't feel like they've achieved. They still feel empty inside. So what you described there, that balance and checking in and being aware, is so important throughout these different periods of our life. And I think that's part of what the men's work that I do, and the coaching and the life coaching that you do as well. It's kind of helping people come back to themselves and recognize what exactly they want, who they are, and how to achieve, how to sort of create smart goals, smart objectives, and action this into existence. Yeah,
very much so. And also one thing I found is sometimes just having the permission to share or be vulnerable, because for especially men, that's not typically encouraged, and often sometimes people in their whole life have never had friends or family that have just given them that, like, you can just be yourself, or you can just speak your mind, or even have an emotion without being judged or criticized. So that just holding space, that can be just transformative in itself, a non-judgmental space. It sounds very simple, but it can be very, very powerful.
For sure. Now, this is the foundation, David, and like what I've been leaning towards or leaning into is using kind of corporate business concepts like a mission statement as a really good starting point, a launch pad. Like, what is your personal mission statement? What is it that you do? How is it that you do it? Why do you do it? And using it as a way for people to start to like, oh, okay, that this is more in tune with my purpose is, where I want to go in life. And then you can start to build whatever it is they want, whatever structure, whatever like wherever activities, whether it's a new relationship, a new job, a new car, you can have those all manifest through something like a mission statement.
Okay, so setting like a clear direction, so you're keeping it grounded.
Exactly, and you can always come back to that anchor point.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's really important to, because I'm just come back from Koh Phangan, and I don't know if you've been there, or you probably...
Yeah, I have actually. Yeah.
Oh, you have, yeah. Yeah. And it's a really cool place, and there's a lot of spirituality stuff going on there, and some really cool stuff, and some stuff also that I find gets too caught up in the ephemeral, and it's hard to like, well, how is this practically gonna... Sounds nice, but how is this actually when I'm, the baby's screaming and my wife's pissed off and I've got bills, how's that actually going to work? Like, so I think it's good to keep grounded in a pragmatic way.
Yeah. It's the masculine and the feminine, the balance there. And, as I said earlier, I've got mixed interests, and I very much am into the sort of Eastern, esoteric, sort of native indigenous traditions. But at the same time, I do agree with you. I do think being pragmatic and having a kind of Western rationale, kind of a reductionist point of view can be very helpful too. So balance.
Yeah. And who are the kind of people that you work with? Like, what's I mean, there might not be an average guy, but what is kind of the makeup of the people that...
Do you know what? I think a lot of them are like me to some degree, like men sort of early to late 20s and 30s, working in media or the arts or in the corporate role that want to change a pace, that starting to recognize that they're not entirely satisfied, or they don't feel whole in their role or their life choice, their position at the moment. So yeah, I mean, again, it's they're all very different, but that's kind of where I see my men sit. It's those who are getting back on track and figuring things out for themselves.
Right. And you mentioned that you do, like, is it retreats or workshops?
Yeah.
As well as the men's circles. What exactly are they? Could you talk about that?
So the workshops vary. So I tend to work around different concepts of masculinity. So it could be like a confidence workshop. It could be a workshop around like healthy masculinity, like tackling this label of like toxic masculinity. I like to keep it interactive. There's breath work, there's movement, there's some sort of like qigong kind of energy work type stuff in there as well. We do shadow work, we do journaling. They're fun. And with the retreats, this is, like I mentioned earlier, the plan is to get into the wilderness, and I have this kind of concept or this idea of working with the elements. So you mentioned earlier breath work and ice baths, and I'd love to do build a fire and kind of get men back into this primal way of living and to connect with the land, because I too think, especially living in a city, we are so disconnected from our origins, really. And having been to the Amazon and doing the work that we've done and things, even being in Koh Phangan, you suddenly you're like, oh, like it's such a weight off my shoulders to be back in, you know, Mother Nature again. So that's the plan for end of summer potentially. I am actually doing a pop-up sort of workshop at a festival called Medicine Festival here in the UK in August. And so that would be kind of broaching the same ideas, but I'd like to do something a bit more in depth, and we'll watch this space.
Yeah, it sounds very cool. And because the toxic masculinity thing is really interesting. I'd love to hear your opinion on that and what, your take on it and how you help men through that. Because I found that I understand why almost the meme of toxic masculinity has come into play, and I think it's in many occasions necessary. And at the same time, my personal experience is that a lot of the people that are maybe would fall in the category of toxic masculinity are not actually going to listen to that, and those that are maybe more sensitive feel like now more unsure of themselves, less able to be masculine. It's in some instances somewhat counterproductive.
No, I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps to use labels like this across the board. And it is quite it's like villainizing the modern man. And like you say, many might just retreat and not want to be responsible and accountable for their own behavior. So my approach to that is all about the archetypes, actually, and again sort of harkening back to Carl Jung, and using the king, warrior, magician, lover archetypes as a way to build a structure, or build a picture of where our masculinity lies. Again, back to shadow work, we kind of have the light and dark version, so we can start to recognize, oh wow, like I'm in my lover, but you know, when you're in the shadow reflection of the lover, there's addiction there's obsession, there's a lot of these kind of shameful acts that you don't want to share with the world. So when you go in circles, all of a sudden you're encouraged to speak on these things, and we can start to iron out the kind of toxic characteristics, the qualities, and I believe kind of graduate boyhood to manhood. I think that's where a lot of this toxicity comes from. It's the immaturity of the man who hasn't learned about themselves, hasn't sort of grown into that sort of the power, the privilege that it is to be a man and to hold that kind of space, you know.
I like what you said. They could like graduate in like a maturation process of being a boy to a man. That's really powerful, and like, I agree 100%, because I don't think like you don't shame people into changing. That just doesn't. I don't think in the history of the world ever has that worked.
Yeah, it's not worth pointing the finger. But I understand, you know, people are sick and tired of this kind of dominator culture, the patriarchy ultimately, and whether you agree or disagree that something like that exists, the truth is there are men in power who abuse it.
Absolutely,
and boys in power who abuse it. So it needs to be addressed, and I agree with what you're saying. It's actually to kind of be sensitive and aware, and to be encouraging of those men, and not to, you know, slap them on the wrist. Well, I mean, you know, some of them need to be sent to prison, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But the truth is there can be a more compassionate way to deal with this.
Cool. And so if people want to find out more about you, Pete, and want to work with you, or are interested in learning more about the kind of workshops that you're holding, where's the best space for them to get in touch with you or find out?
I am at Menswork Coach on all social media platforms. So if you're on Instagram, you can get me there. If you're on Twitter, which I don't use that often, you can get me there. Or my website, mensworkcoach.com, peter@mensworkcoach.com, the email. I've even got my WhatsApp number on my Instagram if you want to communicate that way for like just a chat and see what kind of work we can do together. Cool.
Thank you, Peter. It's been great speaking to you.
No, it's great speaking to you, and I'm really encouraged to hear kind of how happy and how glad you are to be back in Thailand and to be doing the work you do and to be working with the kids. And so, yeah, salute.
Yeah, man. Hopefully once travel resumes, you have to come out and have a
sure.
visit.
One of my best friends actually lives in Bangkok. He's a personal trainer out there and developing his brand and stuff like that. So I'm definitely overdue a visit. Yeah.
Nice one. Thank you, Pete.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, hit the bell button to be updated on all the latest videos. You can check me out on Instagram at David Bailey Life Coach.